Captain Deho stood in the observation deck of the human starship Unity, watching the massive space station grow larger through the window. This was the home of the Galactic Federation, a place where hundreds of alien species came together to share knowledge and keep peace across the stars. Today was supposed to be a good day. Today, humanity would finally join them. Behind him, Ambassador Yuna checked her translation device one more time. She had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. 3 years of learning alien customs, studying their laws, and writing reports about Earth. She wore her best formal suit, dark blue with small silver pins that showed Earth's flag. Her hands were steady, but Deho could see the tension in her shoulders. This meeting mattered more than anything. The station was enormous. It looked like a giant wheel spinning slowly in space, with ships coming and going from hundreds of docking ports. Some of the ships were small and fast. Others were massive cargo vessels that could carry entire cities. The Unity was medium-sized, built for exploration and first contact missions. It was one of humanity's finest ships, but here it looked tiny. Deho had been in space for 15 years. He had seen strange planets and met beings that looked nothing like humans. But this was different. The Federation controlled most of the known galaxy. Getting rejected would mean humanity would have to stay alone, isolated from the great community of spacefaring species. No shared technology, no trade agreements, no protection from hostile forces. Everything depended on today. The docking process took 20 minutes. The station's computers talked to the Unity systems, guiding them into place with perfect precision. When the airlock sealed with a hiss, Yuna took a deep breath. Deho gave her a small nod. They had done everything right. They had followed every rule, submitted every document, and answered every question the Federation had asked. There was no reason to worry. The door opened. A guide was waiting for them, a being that looked like it was made of blue crystal. It spoke through a device that translated its sounds into human language. The voice was polite and formal. It welcomed them to the station and began leading them through the corridors. The walls were white and smooth with symbols in dozens of alien languages. Other beings passed them in the halls. Some looked at the humans with curiosity. Others ignored them completely. They reached the council chamber after a long walk. The room was circular and huge, with seats rising up in layers like an ancient amphitheater. Hundreds of aliens sat in those seats, representatives from every member species of the Federation. In the center was a small platform where speakers could stand. Yuna would stand there soon. She would present humanity's case and answer their questions. The session began with formal greetings. The head of the council was a tall being with 6 arms and skin that changed colors when it spoke. It welcomed the human delegation and thanked them for their patience during the review process. Then it got to the point. The council had reviewed all of humanity's application materials. They had studied the data Earth had sent. They had consulted with their historians and scientists, and they had reached a decision. Deho felt his stomach tighten. Something was wrong. He could hear it in the way the council head spoke. The tone was careful, almost apologetic. Yuna's face remained calm, but her hand moved slightly, pressing a button on her device to make sure she was recording everything. The council head continued. The Federation appreciated humanity's interest in membership. Earth had many qualities that would be valuable. But there was a serious problem. The historical records that humanity had submitted did not match what the Federation knew about species development. In fact, they seemed impossible. Yuna stepped forward. She asked what specifically concerned them. The council head gestured to a large screen that appeared in the air above the platform. Images began to show. Wars, weapons, destroyed cities, mass graves, nuclear explosions, chemical attacks. All from Earth's history, all from humanity's past. A historian from one of the older Federation species stood up to speak. His species had been exploring the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had studied the development of hundreds of civilizations. And in all that time, they had never seen anything like what Earth claimed to be its history. According to human records, Earth had experienced 2 massive world wars within 30 years. Millions had died. Entire cities had been destroyed. And that was just the 20th century. Before that, there were countless other wars, invasions, and conflicts. The historian showed charts and graphs. He compared human history to other species. The numbers did not make sense. Any species that experienced even one major global war usually took centuries to recover. Many never did. They remained divided, too traumatized to trust each other again. But humans claimed they had fought multiple world wars, developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet, and then somehow came together to build a peaceful global government and reach for the stars. It was not believable. Another council member spoke up. This one was small and round, with dozens of eyes covering its body. It suggested that perhaps the human records were exaggerated. Maybe Earth had experienced some conflicts, but not on the scale they claimed. Humans might be inflating their history to seem more impressive, to make other species afraid or respectful. A third voice joined in. This alien was tall and thin, almost skeletal. It proposed that the records might be complete fabrications. Perhaps humanity was trying to create a false narrative of overcoming great challenges. They wanted to look strong and resilient, so they invented a terrible past and claimed to have survived it. Yuna listened to all of this without changing her expression. When they finished, she spoke clearly and calmly. Every record they had submitted was true. Every image, every document, every piece of data was authentic. If the council doubted this, she understood. But she had a request. She asked the Federation to send investigators to Earth. Let them examine the evidence themselves. Let them visit the historical sites, check the archaeological records, and interview human historians. Let them use their own technology to verify the data. Humanity had nothing to hide. If the Federation needed proof, humanity would provide it. The council chamber filled with noise as aliens discussed this among themselves. Some seemed interested. Others looked skeptical. The council had raised 2 of its 6 arms, calling for silence. It consulted briefly with several other members, then turned back to Yuna. Very well. The Federation would send a team of scholars to Earth. They would have full access to examine whatever they wanted. If they found that humanity's records were genuine, the council would reconsider the application. But if they found evidence of deception, humanity would be banned from the Federation permanently. Did the ambassador agree to these terms? Yuna did not hesitate. She agreed immediately. The council head seemed surprised by how quickly she accepted, but it nodded in approval. The investigation would begin within 1 standard month. A delegation of 12 of the Federation's finest historians and scientists would travel to Earth. Humanity should prepare to receive them. As the session ended and the humans left the chamber, Deho finally allowed himself to relax slightly. They walked back to their ship in silence. Only when they were safely inside and the door had sealed, did Yuna let out a long breath. She looked at Deho with tired eyes. The captain asked if she was worried. Yuna shook her head. She was not worried about the investigation. Every word they had told the Federation was true. She was worried about what would happen when the aliens realized that, when they understood that humanity really had survived all of that horror, when they saw what humans were truly capable of. That, she said quietly, might scare them even more than any lie ever could. Dr. Minho received the message 3 days after the Unity returned to Earth. He was in his office at the World History Institute when his computer chimed with an urgent notification. The message was from Ambassador Yuna. The Federation was sending investigators. They would arrive in less than 4 weeks, and Minho would be responsible for showing them everything. Minho was 53 years old. He had spent his entire adult life studying human history, teaching it and trying to make sense of it. He had walked through ancient battlefields and stood in memorial sites. He had read thousands of documents and examined countless artifacts. He knew humanity's past better than almost anyone alive, and it still gave him nightmares sometimes. He called a meeting with his research team. There were 8 of them, specialists in different periods and regions. Isol was the expert on 20th century conflicts. Jiwan knew everything about ancient warfare and medieval history. Together, they began planning the tour. What would convince these alien scholars? Where should they start? What evidence would be most powerful? They decided to begin with the First World War. It was recent enough that extensive records survived, but distant enough that the sites had been preserved as memorials. The trenches in France and Belgium still existed, protected by international agreement. Visitors could walk through them and see exactly where millions of soldiers had lived and died in the mud. When the alien delegation arrived, Minho was waiting at the spaceport. Their ship was elegant and strange, covered in symbols that glowed with soft light. 12 aliens emerged, each one different from the others. Some were tall, some short. Some had multiple limbs, others seemed to float. But all of them carried devices for recording and analyzing data. They were scientists, and they were here to prove humans were liars. The leader of the group was Counselor Velthar. He looked like living crystal, his body refracting light into rainbow patterns. When he spoke through his translator, his voice was cold and formal. He thanked Minho for agreeing to this investigation. Then he made it clear that his team would not be easy to fool. They had analyzed thousands of civilizations. They knew what was possible and what was not. If humanity had fabricated its history, they would find the evidence. Minho simply nodded. He led them to a transport that would take them to France. During the flight, he gave them basic context. The First World War had lasted from 1914 to 1918. It involved dozens of nations and killed approximately 17 million people. The aliens checked his numbers against their own databases, looking for inconsistencies. They found none, but that only made them more suspicious. They arrived at the preserved trenches near Verdun. The site was quiet, with only a few other visitors walking the paths. Minho led the delegation down into the trenches themselves. The walls were reinforced now to keep them from collapsing, but the layout was original. These narrow ditches had been home to thousands of men for months at a time. Isol began explaining the reality of trench warfare. Soldiers lived in these muddy holes, sometimes for weeks without relief. They could not leave or they would be shot. The enemy was often less than 100 meters away in their own trenches. Between them was an area called No Man's Land, filled with barbed wire and bodies. Any attack meant running across that open ground while machine guns fired at you. One of the aliens, a being that resembled a large insect, asked why they did not simply stop fighting. Why stay in the trenches at all? Isol explained that soldiers were ordered to stay. If they left, their own military would execute them for desertion. If they advanced, the enemy would kill them. If they stayed, they might survive another day. So they stayed, and the war dragged on for 4 years. The delegation used their scanning equipment to analyze the site. They measured radiation levels, checked soil composition, and examined the preserved artifacts. Everything confirmed the age and authenticity of the location. But Counselor Velthar was not satisfied. Physical evidence could be fabricated, he said. They needed to see more. Minho took them to a museum next. Inside were display cases filled with objects from the war. Gas masks with glass eyepieces, metal helmets dented by bullets, uniforms stained with blood and mud, medical equipment that looked primitive and brutal. Isol showed them photographs of soldiers with horrific injuries. She explained how poison gas had been used as a weapon, burning lungs and blinding men by the thousands. The aliens studied the gas masks carefully. Several of them seemed disturbed by the concept. They asked if humans really created chemical weapons specifically to cause suffering. Isol confirmed that they had. Not just in this war, but in later ones too. Humans had invented dozens of different toxic gases, each one designed to kill or disable in different ways. Over the next week, Minho guided the delegation to more sites. They visited battlefields from different wars. They examined castles that had been besieged in medieval times. They saw evidence of ancient conflicts going back thousands of years. Every location they visited told the same story. Humans fought each other constantly, with increasing efficiency and brutality as their technology improved. Then came Hiroshima. Minho had been dreading this part of the tour. The Memorial Museum contained photographs and artifacts from the day the atomic bomb was dropped. The images were difficult to look at even for humans who knew what had happened. He was not sure how the aliens would react. They walked through the museum in silence. The displays showed the city before and after the bombing. Before, it was a functioning urban center with hundreds of thousands of people. After, it was ash and rubble. The bomb had killed 80,000 people instantly. Tens of thousands more died later from burns and radiation sickness. Jiwan showed them preserved objects. A watch that had stopped at the exact moment of the explosion. Shadows burned into concrete where people had been standing. Pieces of buildings that had been twisted by the heat. And then he showed them the medical records, the descriptions of radiation sickness, the photographs of survivors with terrible burns. Counselor Velthar's crystalline body seemed to dim. He asked if this was staged somehow, a reconstruction made to look authentic. Minho shook his head. They could test everything. The radiation signatures were still present in the soil and buildings. The isotope decay matched the claimed date perfectly, and there were survivors still alive who remembered the day. One of the delegation members, a small being covered in soft fur, asked the question that several others seemed to be thinking. Why would humans build such a weapon? Why create something that could kill so many of their own species? G1 explained that humans had built it because they were at war. They wanted to end the conflict quickly, and after they built one bomb, they built more. At one point, humans had enough nuclear weapons to destroy all life on Earth several times over. The aliens spent 3 days in Hiroshima. They took samples from dozens of locations. They cross-referenced historical records with geological and atmospheric data. They checked the stories of survivors against independent sources. Everything matched. Every piece of evidence supported the same conclusion. Humans really had used nuclear weapons on their own cities. They really had built thousands more. And somehow they had not destroyed themselves completely. On the evening of the third day, Counselor Velthar asked to speak with Minho privately. They sat in a quiet room at the Memorial Center. The alien was silent for a long time, his crystalline form slowly changing colors. Finally, he spoke. He said that his team had found no evidence of deception. The records appeared to be genuine. But this created a new problem. If humanity's history was real, then humans were the most violent species the Federation had ever encountered. They had survived catastrophes that would have destroyed any other civilization. They had recovered from wars that should have left them permanently broken. And they had done it over and over again. The question was no longer whether humans were lying. The question was whether such a dangerous species should be allowed to join the Federation at all. Minho looked at the alien counselor and felt a deep weariness. He had expected skepticism. He had prepared for accusations of fraud, but he had not considered that the truth might be worse than any lie, that showing humanity's real history might not prove their worthiness, but instead reveal something that made the galaxy fear them. The investigation continued for another 2 weeks. Counselor Velthar wanted to see evidence from different time periods and regions. Minho arranged visits to sites across the world. Each location told another chapter of humanity's violent story. Each one made the aliens more confused about how humans still existed. They went to Cambodia and walked through the killing fields. The aliens saw the mass graves where millions had been murdered in just 4 years. They examined the evidence of systematic execution, torture, and starvation. The scale was difficult to comprehend. One small country had lost 1/4 of its population to violence committed by its own government. In Poland, they visited the preserved sites of concentration camps. Isel explained how these places had been built specifically for mass murder. Trains brought people from across Europe. They were sorted upon arrival. Some were sent to work as slaves until they died from exhaustion. Others were killed immediately. The machinery of death was industrial and efficient. 6 million people were murdered in these camps, targeted simply for their religion or ethnicity. One of the alien scholars, a being with multiple eye stalks, asked how this was possible. How could humans do this to other humans? Isol had been asked this question many times before. She explained that the killers had convinced themselves that their victims were not really human. They created categories and labels. They spread propaganda that dehumanized entire groups of people. Once that mental separation was complete, killing became easier. The aliens tested everything. They analyzed DNA from mass graves to verify the death counts. They examined documents and cross-referenced them with multiple independent sources. They used advanced scanning technology to date structures and artifacts. Every test confirmed the same terrible truth. The historical records were accurate. Humans really had done all of this to each other. After 2 weeks of investigation, Counselor Velthar called a meeting with Captain Deho and Ambassador Yuna. They met in a private room at the World History Institute. The alien counselor looked exhausted, if such a thing was possible for a being made of crystal. His colors were darker than when he had first arrived. Velthar spoke directly. His team had completed their analysis. They had found no evidence of fraud or fabrication. The historical records were genuine. Humanity's past was exactly as brutal as they had claimed. But this created a serious problem for the Federation. Every species in their database that had experienced even a fraction of Earth's violence had either gone extinct or remained permanently divided into hostile groups. He pulled up a chart on his device, displaying it as a hologram above the table. The chart showed dozens of civilizations. Each one had a mark indicating when they experienced major internal conflict. Most had only 1 or 2 marks. A few had 3. None had more than 4. Earth's line on the chart was covered in marks, hundreds of them stretching back thousands of years. It did not fit the pattern at all. Captain Deho asked what happened to the other species after their conflicts. Velthar explained that it varied. Some managed to rebuild slowly over centuries. Others fragmented into separate societies that never reunited. Several destroyed themselves completely in final wars, but all of them were changed permanently. The trauma was too deep. The trust was too broken. They never fully recovered. Yet humanity claimed to have experienced dozens of major wars, multiple genocides, and came close to nuclear annihilation. And then they simply continued. They rebuilt their cities. They formed new governments. They created international organizations to prevent future wars. Within a few generations, they were exploring space. It should not have been possible. Yuna asked the question that Velthar seemed to be avoiding. What did this mean for humanity's application? Was the Federation going to reject them because they had survived too much? Because they were too resilient? The irony was not lost on her. They were being judged not for being weak, but for being too strong. Velthar was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he had a question first. How did humanity do it? How did they survive and recover so many times? What made humans different from every other species the Federation had studied? If Yuna could answer that, it might help the Council understand what they were really dealing with. Yuna thought carefully before answering. She called in Dr. Seoyun, a psychologist who specialized in trauma and recovery. Seoyun had been waiting nearby in case she was needed. She entered the room and sat down, looking at the alien counselor with curious eyes. Velthar repeated his question. What made humans different? Seoyun said that she could not give a simple answer, because there was not one, but she could share what she had learned from studying human history and psychology. Humans had a strange quality that she called adaptive resilience. They could endure terrible things and still find reasons to keep living. They could lose everything and still rebuild. Part of it was biological. Human brains were good at forgetting pain over time and focusing on hope. But there was something else too. Humans who experienced war often became the strongest advocates for peace. Societies that suffered genocide built the most powerful humanitarian organizations. Each generation learned from the previous one's mistakes. They saw the photographs and read the testimonies. They visited the memorials and heard the stories, and many of them decided they would not repeat those mistakes. Velthar asked if this always worked. Did humans always learn from their mistakes? Seoyun shook her head. No, they did not. Humans repeated mistakes frequently. They started new wars even after experiencing terrible ones. They committed new atrocities even after condemning old ones. But enough humans learned. Enough humans changed. And over time, the balance slowly shifted toward peace. Captain Deho added his perspective. He had been in the military for most of his life. He knew how to fight and kill. But human military training now emphasized restraint and rules of engagement. Soldiers were taught when not to shoot as carefully as they were taught when to shoot. They had courts that prosecuted war crimes. They had agreements about protecting civilians. These rules existed because humans knew what happened without them. Pilot Junho, who had been piloting the delegation's transport, was invited to join the conversation. He was young, only 28, but he had studied military history at the academy. He explained that modern human military doctrine was built on the understanding that war was terrible. Commanders were trained to seek peaceful solutions first. Force was the last option, not the first. This was not because humans were naturally peaceful. It was because they had learned through bitter experience. Ambassador Yuna spoke about diplomacy. She said that human negotiators were often very persistent. They would spend years working on peace agreements, trying to find compromises, creating complex systems to prevent conflict. Some people found this annoying. Why not just accept when talks failed? But Yuna said it was because humans knew the alternative. They had seen what happened when diplomacy failed. They had counted the bodies, so they kept trying. Velthar listened to all of this carefully. His crystalline body shifted through different colors as he processed the information. Finally, he asked another question. Did humans still have the capacity for violence? If they were threatened, could they be as brutal as their history suggested? The room went quiet. Everyone knew this was the real question. Were humans safe to have in the Federation, or were they a danger waiting to explode? Captain Deho answered honestly. Yes, humans still had that capacity. The weapons still existed, though most were dismantled or locked away. The knowledge was still there. The instincts were still there. If humanity faced an existential threat, if someone tried to destroy Earth or enslave its people, then yes, humans would fight with everything they had. They would be as fierce and ruthless as any species in the galaxy. But, Deho continued, that was not who humans wanted to be. They had spent centuries trying to become better. They had built laws and institutions to control their violent impulses. They had created a culture that valued peace. It was hard work. It required constant effort. But they were doing it because they remembered what they had been, and they did not want to be that again. Una added one more thought. She said that maybe humanity's violent past was not a weakness or a danger. Maybe it was a source of wisdom. Humans understood violence in a way that peaceful species could not. They knew how conflicts started, how they escalated, and how they ended. They knew what worked to prevent war and what did not. This knowledge could be valuable to the Federation. If they were willing to learn from it. Velthar stood up slowly. He said he needed to think about everything he had heard. His team needed to discuss their findings and prepare a report for the Federation Council. It would take several days. In the meantime, he thanked the humans for their honesty. It would have been easy to hide the worst parts of their history or try to justify it, but they had not done that. They had shown everything and accepted responsibility for it. That meant something. As the alien counselor left the room, Una exchanged glances with Deho. They had done everything they could. They had told the truth. They had explained as best they could. Now they had to wait and see if the truth was something the galaxy could accept. 5 days later, Counselor Velthar requested another meeting with the human delegation. This time he wanted to address the full Federation Council, and he wanted humans present to answer questions. Ambassador Una agreed immediately. They would return to the Federation station and face whatever judgment awaited them. The Unity made the journey in silence. Captain Deho kept the ship running smoothly, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about everything the aliens had seen. The trenches, the concentration camps, the atomic bomb sites. If he were them, would he want humans in the Federation? Would he trust a species with such a terrible history? Una spent the journey preparing. She reviewed her notes and practiced her responses to possible questions. But she also spent time looking at images from Earth, not the war memorials or mass graves. She looked at pictures of cities where people from different cultures lived together peacefully. Schools where children learned about history so they would not repeat it. Parks and monuments dedicated to peace. This was humanity too. This was what they had become. When they arrived at the Federation station, the atmosphere felt different. Other delegates and visitors looked at the humans with new eyes. Word had spread about the investigation. Some species seemed curious. Others looked wary, even afraid. The humans were no longer unknown newcomers. They were the species with the impossible history. The council chamber was packed. Every seat was filled and more beings watched through holographic projections. This session would be broadcast across the Federation. Billions would see whatever happened here. Una felt the weight of it. She was not just representing Earth's current government. She was representing all of human history. Counselor Velthar took the central platform. He began by summarizing the investigation. His team had spent 3 weeks examining Earth's historical records and physical evidence. They had visited dozens of sites across multiple continents. They had tested artifacts, analyzed documents, and interviewed historians. Their conclusion was clear and unanimous. Everything humanity had claimed about their history was true. The chamber erupted in noise. Some species seemed shocked. Others had clearly expected this result. Velthar waited for silence before continuing. He displayed the same chart he had shown to the humans earlier. The one comparing Earth's conflict history to other civilizations. The difference was stark and undeniable. Velthar explained what this meant. Humanity had experienced more major internal conflicts than any other known species. They had developed weapons of mass destruction and used them. They had committed systematic genocide multiple times. They had come within moments of destroying their entire planet. And yet they had survived. They had recovered. They had unified. And now they were here, applying for Federation membership. The question, Velthar said, was what the Federation should do with this information. He presented the council with three options. First, they could accept humanity as members, trusting that their violent past was truly behind them. Second, they could reject humanity permanently, deciding that such a dangerous species had no place in the Federation. Third, they could delay the decision and require humanity to prove themselves over many more years. Before the council voted, several members asked to speak. The first was a representative from an ancient species that had been part of the Federation for thousands of years. She argued for rejection. Her species had seen many civilizations rise and fall. Violence was a pattern that rarely changed. Humans might seem peaceful now, but their nature would show itself eventually. The Federation should not take that risk. Another speaker disagreed. He represented a species that had experienced one civil war in their past and had nearly destroyed themselves. It took them 800 years to recover. He said that surviving violence taught valuable lessons. His species would never have valued peace so deeply if they had not known the alternative. Perhaps humanity's extreme history had taught them extreme wisdom. A third voice joined the debate. This representative argued that humanity's military capabilities were too dangerous to ignore. They had already demonstrated the ability to create weapons of mass destruction. They knew how to wage war efficiently. If they ever turned those capabilities against the Federation, the results could be catastrophic. Better to keep them isolated. Felthar then called on Ambassador Yuna to address the council. She walked to the central platform, feeling the eyes of hundreds of alien beings watching her. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, then began to speak. Yuna acknowledged that everything the council had heard about human history was true. She did not try to minimize it or make excuses. Humans had done terrible things to each other. They had made horrible choices. They had caused unimaginable suffering. This was not propaganda or exaggeration. It was their real past, and they carried the weight of it every day. But she asked the council to consider what this history had taught humanity. They learned that war was easy to start and hard to end. They learned that hatred could be manufactured and spread like disease. They learned that good people could do evil things if they stopped seeing others as equally human. These were hard lessons bought with millions of lives. Humanity would never forget them. She explained how human education now included extensive study of past atrocities. Children learned about the Holocaust, the World Wars, and other genocides, not to glorify violence, but to understand how it happened. They studied the warning signs. They learned how ordinary people became complicit in terrible things. The goal was to recognize those patterns and prevent them from happening again. Yuna spoke about human art and culture. Some of humanity's greatest literature was written by people who had experienced war. Their stories did not celebrate violence. They showed its reality, the pain, the loss, the waste. These stories were taught in schools and remembered across generations. They were part of how humans transmitted wisdom about the cost of conflict. Intelligence analyst Hyejin was invited to present data. She showed statistics comparing human recovery rates from disasters to other species. Humans rebuilt faster. They adapted more quickly. When cities were destroyed, humans cleared the rubble and started building within months. When governments collapsed, new ones formed rapidly. This was not because humans were careless about destruction. It was because they had learned how to survive it. Hyejin also presented cultural diversity data. Earth had thousands of distinct cultures, languages, and traditions. This diversity existed because human populations had been separated by geography and conflict for most of their history. But now they shared a single planet peacefully. They had learned to see this diversity as strength rather than a source of division. It drove innovation and creative problem-solving. Medical officer Ji-hyun added research about human psychology and conflict resolution. She showed data on how humans who had experienced violence often became advocates for peace. Soldiers who fought in wars frequently opposed future military action. Survivors of genocide worked to prevent new atrocities. This pattern was consistent across cultures and time periods. Human capacity for empathy seemed to grow from understanding suffering. The council listened to all of this. Then they began asking questions. One wanted to know what guarantees humanity could offer, that they would not become violent again. Yuna answered honestly. There were no guarantees. Humans were imperfect. They still had conflicts, though mostly solved through dialogue now. But they could promise constant vigilance and commitment to peace. Another asked about human weapons. Did they still possess nuclear arsenals? Captain Daiho confirmed that some nuclear weapons still existed. though the numbers had been reduced by more than 90%. They were maintained as deterrents, locked under multiple layers of security. Humanity hoped to eliminate them completely someday, but the process was slow and required trust. A third question addressed human expansion. If humanity joined the Federation and gained access to new technologies and worlds, would they become aggressive? Would they try to conquer or colonize? Yuna explained that human colonial history was another dark chapter they had learned from. Modern humans rejected the idea of conquest. They wanted to explore and learn, not dominate. The session continued for hours. Every concern was addressed. Every fear was acknowledged. Yuna and her team answered everything honestly, never trying to hide uncomfortable truths. They presented humanity as they were, flawed but striving to be better, carrying the weight of a terrible past but working toward a peaceful future. Finally, the council head called for a recess. They would deliberate and vote in 2 days. Until then, the human delegation should rest and prepare for the outcome, whatever it was. As they left the chamber, Yuna felt exhausted but oddly calm. They had done everything they could. They had told the truth. They had explained who humans were and what they had learned. If the Federation could not accept that, then perhaps they were not ready for each other yet. But Yuna believed in what she had said. Humanity had changed. They deserved a chance to prove it. The 2 days of waiting felt longer than the entire investigation. Ambassador Yuna tried to stay busy, reviewing documents and preparing for different possible outcomes. Captain Deho ran maintenance checks on the Unity 3 times, just to have something to do. The other members of the delegation found their own ways to cope with the uncertainty. Security Chief Taehyun monitored communications from Earth. The home government wanted constant updates, though there was little to report. The Federation was deliberating. That was all anyone knew. Taehyun also quietly reviewed contingency plans. If humanity was rejected, what would happen next? Would the Federation simply send them home? Or would there be restrictions, sanctions, or worse? On Earth, billions of people watched news feeds and waited. The investigation had been broadcast. Everyone had seen the aliens walking through human memorial sites. They had heard Counselor Velthar's reports about human violence. Some people felt ashamed. Others felt defensive. Many felt both. Humanity was being judged by the entire galaxy, and the verdict could change everything. Teacher Donghyun gave interviews to human media, trying to provide context and calm people's fears. He explained that the Federation was cautious because they cared about maintaining peace. Their careful deliberation was actually a good sign. It meant they took the decision seriously. If they had seen humans as truly hopeless, they would have rejected the application immediately without investigation. Scientist Suman worked on educational materials, assuming humanity would eventually need them whether they joined the Federation now or later. She prepared lessons about alien biology, galactic history, and intercultural communication. Her team created virtual reality experiences that would help humans understand life on other worlds. This knowledge would be valuable regardless of the vote. Finally, the day of the vote arrived. The human delegation received notification to return to the council chamber at the designated time. They dressed carefully, knowing that appearances mattered in diplomacy. Yuna chose to wear a traditional Korean hanbok, modified slightly for the formal occasion. She wanted the Federation to see human culture, not just human politics. The chamber was even more crowded than before. Species that had not attended the previous session were present now. Everyone wanted to witness this historic moment. Would the Federation accept the violent species, or would they make an example of humanity, showing that some histories were too dark to overlook? The council head called the session to order. The chamber fell silent immediately. Every being present understood the weight of what was about to happen. The decision made here would affect billions of lives across multiple species. It would set a precedent for how the Federation handled similar situations in the future. The council head explained that they had debated for 6 full days. The discussion had been intense and sometimes heated. Strong opinions existed on both sides. Some council members believed humanity's violent history disqualified them permanently. Others argued that surviving such a history demonstrated extraordinary resilience and wisdom. The Federation had never faced such a difficult decision. Before announcing the vote results, the council head invited Counselor Velthar to speak. The crystalline being who had led the investigation walked slowly to the platform. His colors shifted as he gathered his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was measured and thoughtful. Belthar said that investigating human history had changed him. He had started the assignment convinced he would expose lies. Instead, he had discovered something more disturbing and more impressive. Humans were exactly what their records showed them to be. They were capable of terrible violence. But they were also capable of incredible compassion, creativity, and determination. He spoke about visiting concentration camps and seeing how humans had preserved them as memorials. Not to celebrate what happened there, but to remember and to warn future generations. He talked about meeting survivors of wars who dedicated their lives to peace education. He described seeing weapon museums where humans displayed their most destructive creations and explained why they must never be used again. What impressed Belthar most was human honesty about their failures. They did not hide their dark history or make excuses for it. They acknowledged it fully and tried to learn from it. This willingness to face uncomfortable truths was rare among civilizations. Most species either denied their violent past or became paralyzed by guilt. Humans did neither. They remembered and moved forward. Belthar then addressed a concern many council members shared. Were humans dangerous? Yes, he said. They absolutely were. They knew how to wage war efficiently. They understood strategy and tactics. They could build weapons of mass destruction. But this was not necessarily a negative trait. The galaxy had threats. Pirates, aggressive species, natural disasters. Having a member species that understood conflict could be valuable. More importantly, Belthar argued, humans understood the cost of violence in a way peaceful species never could. They knew what war really meant. They had seen it, survived it, and counted its victims. This made them cautious about using force. It made them persistent in seeking peaceful solutions. The Federation could learn from this perspective. Therefore, Belthar concluded he was voting in favor of human membership. He believed the risks were manageable and the potential benefits were significant. Humanity had earned the right to join the galactic community, not despite their brutal history, but because they had faced it honestly and learned from it. The council had thanked Belthar and called for the vote. Each member would indicate their choice through their computer systems. The results would be tallied and announced immediately. No one spoke as the voting commenced. The only sound was the soft hum of the station systems. Yuna held her breath. Beside her, Captain Deho's jaw was tight. Dr. Seoyun closed her eyes. Every human in the chamber felt time slow down as they waited for the results. The council head looked at the display in front of them. Their expression was impossible to read. Then they spoke. The vote had been counted. By the narrowest margin in Federation history, humanity's application for membership had been approved. The chamber erupted. Some species cheered. Others made sounds of dismay or disbelief. Yuna felt tears forming in her eyes. Deho let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. They had done it. Humanity would join the Federation, but the council head raised a hand for silence. There were conditions. Humanity's membership would come with unprecedented oversight requirements. They would need to accept Federation observers on Earth. They would need to participate in extensive cultural exchange programs. They would need to regularly report on their internal conflicts and how they were resolved. And they would be subject to immediate review if they showed signs of reverting to their violent past. Captain Deho stood and formally accepted these terms without hesitation. Humanity understood the Federation's caution. They welcomed the oversight. They were eager to participate in cultural exchanges. If the Federation wanted proof that humans could be trusted, humans would provide it continuously. Scientist Suman immediately began coordinating with Federation officials about education protocols. She wanted to start student exchange programs within 6 months. Teacher Dongyun volunteered to establish the first human-alien cultural center on Earth. It would be a place where beings from any species could learn about human history, art, and philosophy. Over the next hours, practical details were discussed. Trade agreements would be negotiated. Technology sharing would be gradual and carefully monitored. Human ships would receive updated navigation systems that could interface with Federation networks. Earth would get representation on several council committees, though with limited voting power initially. As the session concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Councillor Belthar approached Ambassador Yuna privately. He asked if he could speak with her for a moment. They found a quiet corner away from the crowds. Velthar told Yuna that he hoped humans understood what they had accomplished. Joining the Federation was not just about gaining access to technology or trade. It was about joining a community that valued peace above all else. Humanity would be expected to contribute to maintaining that peace, to share their knowledge and to help other species avoid the mistakes humans had made. Yuna assured him that humans understood. She said that humanity's story was not an aberration. It was a warning. Every species had the capacity for both creation and destruction. Every civilization faced choices between cooperation and conflict. What mattered was not whether darkness existed in a species' past. What mattered was whether they chose to walk toward the light. Humanity had made that choice, Yuna continued. It had not been easy. It required constant work and vigilance, but they had committed to peace, to learning, to growing, and now they wanted to help others make that same choice. They wanted to share what they had learned, both their failures and their successes. Velthar's crystalline form glowed softly. He said he believed her. He had seen enough during the investigation to understand that humans were serious about change. He looked forward to working with humanity in the years ahead. The Federation needed fresh perspectives. Perhaps humans, with their unique history, could provide insights that would benefit everyone.